Hi, it's time to discuss the visual arts elements. This is coming from the handout that's in Blackboard. We're going to go to the center of the handout and do the visual arts elements here. I'll post those with the YouTube video here as well. I'm going to be using a few different books as examples here, but again, we're going to mostly stick with Where the Wild Things Are as the center example. And this is a good book to go to just for first discussing composition. And when we're talking about composition, we're talking about how all of the pieces and parts are laid out on the page. And I'm going to start with this one right here, the composition. This composition, of course, we have a full illustration crossing the spread and across the gutter here in the center. But if you look at this page more closely, what you see is that the composition has the main character, Max, all the way over here, and all of the other characters are kind of looking towards him and oriented towards him, so that you have kind of an odd balance here of something that's main over on this side, and everything that is referring to that main element is all the way over here. And so what you often see in composition is that if somebody knows what they're doing with art, they'll often put together a composition that is asymmetrical rather than symmetrical. A symmetrical composition would have everything kind of balanced straight out from the center line, equal stuff over here, equal stuff over here. And we do have 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, but also we've really got this clear division of Max over here, Wild Things over here, kind of pulling things into an asymmetry. So it's an asymmetrical composition. This is another example of an asymmetrical composition here. Instead of filling everything up exactly this way on the page, on the spread with these monsters, you've got this section over here that's kind of filled up, and then as you move over here, it's less filled and less filled until we get over here to Max. And that forces us to cross this tidal area back and forth between Max and the Wild Things, so that we're actually looking at the title there. So let's see, another example of asymmetry. The title page here that's before the conventional title page, you've got it almost dominated here by negative space. And this negative space here, it just means stuff that isn't filled up. Nothing has been done to this, but it's really clearly there on purpose as an entire spread for you to look at. And over here, really off-center, down in the far left-hand corner, the title, Where the Wild Things Are. It's not up in the middle where you might expect it to be. If you did put it up in the middle like that, it would call emphasis to just this page. And this one would seem more like it was just blank, not being used. But when we see this full composition with this down in the down in the corner here, it calls attention to the entire spread as a unit, as a big rectangle with this title off in one corner. So composition is often also done in a rule of thirds as opposed to a rule of halves. So sometimes the composition, if you look at it, you'll get the sense that the page is split up, instead of it being split up into halves, that you can clearly see that you've got, let's see over here for Max, a third of the spread spent on this part of the picture, and then over here you've got this this cave that's taking up roughly that third, and then the middle third here is being taken up by this part of the composition. And so oftentimes thirds are considered a kind of symmetry in page design and composition as well. Frame, which we do a fairly good demonstration of in class, just lets you know how the picture is outlined. And Sendak, at the early stages of this book, uses the margins to give us a narrow frame, and that frame widens using the margins, encroaching on the margins page by page until it gets closer and closer to the margins. The frame is getting wider. If this were done with a camera, we'd be talking about zooming in. Sendak also had training and experience as a stage set designer, and so this is kind of like the same effect as like opening up the curtains and turning on the lights on a stage, bringing us into the world of the stage. So by the time we hit this page, the margins are no longer there on the illustration side of things, and the frame is now the entire page, which has a great effect in this book of drawing us in to say we are inside this world of the book now, and that becomes more and more complete as the pages pass, as the margin of the second page in the spread starts to get encroached on and pushed around to the point where at the center of the book, Maurice Sendak has us in a full bleed off the edges of the page, no margins, and incidentally no words anymore. When we're entirely in the wild world, we've lost language. Language is gone. So some of that human element is being pushed out bit by bit with the framing. Line is an interesting thing for us to talk about. Lines are used in different ways in a composition, and one of the ways that line is used is to show action or motion, and I'm just going to bring us to this one right here. So when we talk about line, we're not always talking about exactly a drawn line. We're talking about an implied line in the composition. So I'm going to pull this paper here. We're just going to see that, let's pull it down. You see that the composition kind of follows a line that's going diagonal across the page, down the stairs, through Max, and over to the dog. So there's a line of sight that follows through the stairs, Max, and the dog. And because that's diagonal, and because Max is kind of up diagonal instead of straight up and down, it gives a sense of motion and action. And that's important for a person who's an illustrator, because your page is flat. And so you have to do things that give the illusion of motion. And when everything is straight up and down, there's a lot less motion going on here. And so I'm just going to take you quickly to a page where it's not diagonal so much as it is vertical and horizontal. Max, the trees, the lines in his room do give you a sense of depth that's going on there from the diagonal lines that are following the floor. But in general, the up and down of the trees, Max standing straight up and down instead of jumping. This is not a page that's dominated by motion or dynamics, so the dynamics are really low on a page like that. As we move through the book, various things are done with the characters to give it a feel of dynamics versus a feeling of being static. So with a page like this, there are all sorts of diagonal lines that show movement. So the legs here, the line going up to the moon from the eyes is all showing sort of a diagonal orientation, so you should feel like things are moving quite a bit more here. And literally the characters are moving and jumping and so on, but as a person who draws, as an illustrator, you can make a mistake of doing that with lines that just go straight up and down and straight across, and you don't get that feel of movement that you can get by using dynamic and diagonal lines. Color. In color, one of the key words that you'd bring out is process. In printing, there is black and white process, and there's color process. And the most elaborate color process is four-color process. And this book has four-color process, which means that it's got reds, blues, yellows, reds, blues, yellows, and I think greens are a separate color. In a book like this, Witches, the entire book is almost all done with black and white. And let me get to an illustration here. The scratchboard drawings are just black and white, but they've added a single color in here. They've added red in as a color process on each of the pages. That's not as expensive as four-color process to run it through a printer. And in conventional four-color printing, four-color means that they have to run it through an ink machine for each one of those four colors. So it takes a printing press that has four different stages to the process. So a book like this would only go through the normal black and white printer for the words and other pieces that are black and white, the line drawings and so on, but then it would be run through the press again for the red. With some of the laser printing and so on, I don't think that that's as complicated as it used to be, but many presses with high quality production still do use the 4 colors. So where the Wild Things Are would have been run through black and white for the print and for also the black and white elements, the ink drawings that are at the heart of this book. But then it would have been run back through for the greens, for the yellows, the reds, and so on to get all of those colors in there. Let's see. The palette of colors is the range of colors that are used for the book, and I'm going to just pull out a Dr. Seuss ABC. The palette in this is really made mostly up of primary colors, so that if you open any page in this, you're going to really see clear blues, yellows, reds, greens, just very typical primary colors palette. And here's another book, Frog and Toad Are Friends, or sorry, Frog and Toad Together. The palette is more limited in this book, and it also limits the color process that's used. You've got black and white, and you've also got some yellows and greens that are in here being used together to get the more earthy tone that we're used to seeing in a Frog and Toad book. So the palette is that sense that there's a limited range of colors that an artist picks to choose the illustrations from. Let's see. Shape is the next element that we're going to talk about, and in illustrations we'll see an illustrator choose to focus on round shapes or angular shapes in ways that bring an effect. So for example, this wild thing right here that looks kind of like a sea monster or dragon sort of a thing has a little bit more angular quality to it, and it should give it a more harsh or unfriendly sort of a feel. That's not always going to be true that angles make things unfriendly, but it definitely has something else going on. Then these monsters, these wild things here, have been given a very round appearance to them, and it should take some of the edge off of their ferocity, such that roundness is something that should feel a little bit more soft to your eyes, a little bit more friendly. And these wild things in particular have kind of round bellies, round heads, round faces, that such that their terrible teeth don't look quite so dangerous. But over here, on the other side of the spread, you see a couple more wild things that have a little bit more angular look to them, and this one that's bearing down on Max's boat should look a little bit less friendly to you. And Max is kind of giving us a look that lets us know that he is kind of put off by that wild thing. Let's see if there's some other examples of something that's round versus angular. Let's go to a different book here. So, again, from Dr. Seuss's ABC. Dr. Seuss tends to do a lot of rounding and using roundness in his pictures. So you can see that the roundness of the bubbles, the roundness of the people and their bellies and the chairs and everything, those are all something that's supposed to give you a sense that it is soft and perhaps a little bit more safe. On something like the scissors and the bee here, the more angular lines and sharp lines are used to get your eye thinking that it's not quite so safe, and so on. Texture. 2 examples of texture that are clear in where the wild things are. One example of texture is this cross-hatching that Maurice Sendak did in a number of his pages. He overlays the entire end sheets with cross-hatching, spending an awful lot of time to just draw lines to make this look like a screen, to the effect that we're looking through a screen almost. It gives us that texture of things being muted or toned down, and that tends to be fairly consistent with the pages where we're back at his house, that everything is kind of muted and toned down, and that screen cross-hatching over almost everything on the pages, it doesn't completely disappear because Sendak uses ink as one of his main techniques. But here, where his room is turning into the jungle, you've got a clear contrast that's drawn here between that screen and the jungle. In this piece, the trees are growing up in front of that screen, and in the background, his bedroom and the bed and everything is still behind that screen of cross-hatching. So it gives this almost a three-dimensional effect to see it popping out in front of that screen. So by the time we get to this page, we're not behind a screen anymore. While there's still some cross-hatching and ink work done on this, the jungle that's appearing for us here is in full painting. It's just paint. It's not got all of that ink drawing over the top of everything. Although, he does use ink to give us the drawings. This illustration is mostly about the painting and less about sitting there and drawing meticulous little lines through everything to give it that texture. Another element of texture that you can see is that the leaves are given texture with not just the, let's get it right here, not just the green to make the leaves, but the darker green to give them the sense that there's depth to those leaves. And the last piece that I'm going to get to here, I hope that the webcam zooms in on this okay, is this moon in Max's bedroom is illustrated with all sorts of little pits and craters in it, so that you should get the sense that this feels and looks like an actual full moon would look, almost looking through a telescope. It's got the little unevenness on the surface of the moon that you would expect if you were looking at it through a telescope. It's very different from what was done with the moon in earlier parts of the book, where it was more just a flat painting or a flat drawing of a crescent moon. By the middle of the rumpus, you should be able to zoom in on it and see that it's got a little bit more purposeful texture to it, and that's just something that should make you pay attention to that moon as a detail. What it means is a whole other thing, but that's something that Maurice Sendak has done on purpose. All right, that's going to be it for Visual Arts Elements, about 17 minutes of video. Thanks.